Hello and welcome to the FintechWire Innovators Podcast. My name is Ed Medina and I'm the editor of FintechWire. In today's episode, we're going to be asking, how ready are banks for artificial intelligence, especially now that generative AI and ChatGPT are here? AI is transforming the financial industry, from underwriting and risk to customer service and investing. Banks and financials have been hiring and investing in this transformative technology, but a number of sources have shown that they still have work to do. To help us understand how banks are addressing this challenge, we've invited Alexandra Mousavizadeh, CEO and co-founder of Evident Insights. Alexandra and her team created the Evident AI Index, comparing the AI capabilities of major banks and establishing a global standard benchmark of AI maturity for the banking sector. Alexandra, it's a pleasure to welcome you to the show. Tell us about yourself and Evident, please.
Thank you so much for having me, Ed. I'm very pleased to be here today. I am actually an economist by training. I have, however, built indices my entire career. And in 2018, as head of intelligence for a British media company called Tortoise Media, built the first global AI index, measuring nations' strength of their AI ecosystems, country by country, really to explore who was winning the AI race geopolitically, looking at the US versus China, Canada versus UK, France versus Germany, Singapore, Israel, and so on. We got really deep in the weeds of how to measure AI ecosystems. And as businesses were starting to invest more in AI, we were pulled into the question of whether we could use our concept of measuring AI ecosystems and do it on companies. And that is what we set out with when we established Evident and launched our first index, AI adoption metrics benchmark for banks, in January 2023.
Well, there's so much data in the report. Can you tell us what were some of the key findings?
Well, it was really interesting when you sort of hit the button and run the index ranking after having gathered all of this data. You're really obviously curious and keen to see who ranks in the top 10. What we found was, and maybe I should just quickly step back and say, the way we built the index is mining millions of data points that fall into carefully selected indicators, of 150 of them that fall into 4 buckets. And those 4 buckets are talent. So we look at the entire talent stack of a bank. We look at innovation, which means all of the elements that are either directly or proxies of AI implementation accelerators, such as research and patents and partnerships, ventures, acquisitions, strategic investments in AI companies, partnerships with the universities, activity on open source platforms, and so on. That's our second pillar. Third pillar, we look at operating model, leadership. We look at the clarity of the vision that the bank has stated in terms of resources going towards AI, but also prioritization of the bank, but also talking about the operational model, how the bank is structured in order to be as nimble as it can in terms of the speed with which that it can adopt AI. And then we look at responsible AI. So that's stated principles and controls to manage the specific risks that pertain to AI adoption. So there are many data points, say, funnel into these 4 pillars, and we score each bank across all of these indicators, and outcomes are ranking. And in the top 10, it was very interesting to see that it was very much dominated by the North American banks. There were 2 Canadian banks in there, and there were a couple of there was 1 European bank in the top 10, but otherwise it was predominantly US banks.
You mentioned the data points and the pillars. Did you use AI to analyze this data?
We do. It's a big team of data scientists, and they love exploring and using new tools. So as soon as the ChatGPT 4 capabilities were released, we were all over it and used it across both our data gathering, but also making sense of the data that we have. So we run these types of tools over our data to synthesize it, to interrogate it. But we also use lots of other tools, machine learning, natural language processing, and so on. One in the team has created a way to, in real time, select and gather all press releases from all the banks in the world on anything to do with AI. And so we then organize it. So actually, in building that tool, it's great for our data collection, some of which goes into the index, but some of it just keeps us current as well. We're very curious about what's going on in the all of the activity, AI activity that the banks have, and some, as I said, go into direct indicators, but some are also just to help us look at the trends around the sort of more formal indicators that we're looking at. And those could, for example, be what are the hiring trends in the banks. We take a very close look at job descriptions so we can see what banks are hiring for. So who's hiring for what type of AI capabilities tell you a lot about what direction the banks are going in. But essentially, that's the matrix and the grid the banks that are, quite mature have in their DNA and is set up and has been looking at AI use cases like that for a long time. So when Gen AI came along and the release of ChatGPT happened, it changed everything and it changed nothing at the same time. But what it did do, it really exposed the banks that didn't have an organized way to look at, surface, and select use cases from ideation to production. So the banks that didn't have that set up and maybe were sort of more operating in a siloed fashion, bottom-up approach where you're looking at it just sort of business line to business line and didn't have a centralized body for decision-making, were sort of caught with their pants down. And now all of the banks that are, really, now, and every bank has to, every bank is reconsidering how they are organizing themselves around the selection of the use cases and what to implement, what to buy, what to invest in.
Interesting. What were some of the other key findings?
There are a couple of things that came out from this since we launched. I mean, first of all, there's been a really big change in the last year, and particularly from January. And I'd love to say it coincides with the release of our index, but I think it's also just that the mindset, of course, with generative AI now is that everyone has to be thinking about what they're doing with AI. So it's surfaced to the top of the board pack. Most banks are doubling down on AI hires, much more than the AI hiring has accelerated, not necessarily because of Gen AI, because actually the Gen AI related AI hiring has only just started to happen because there's been a period where banks have just spent some time thinking about where do we actually use it and where is it safe to use it. Now we're starting to see a rapid increase in Gen AI related use case execution. And that's typically in sort of prompt engineer type roles. Banks are also looking very much inward to their own AI talent to look at how can we reskill or redeploy the resources that we have. But we're starting to see an increase in those kinds of jobs. And then we've seen in the last year just really big increases in things like AI patent filings and much more research being released, much more visibility on hiring initiatives specific for AI talent, a growth in hiring out of academia. Hadn't seen that the year before. It was sort of flat. And now we've seen a big growth in that because you're looking for really specific skill sets. The other thing we've noticed is that we've actually started to map the position of the index on correlated to financial performance. And we've seen that correlation become clearer and clearer. So the higher you are, the more AI mature you are, the stronger the link is to your financial performance. And we think that trend is going to get stronger over time. But we look forward to be tracking that exact information.
Is that a strong connection now, or is it something that's so new that it's sort of hard to discern?
No, it's clear that it's there. It is. It's only now that we could, if we had run those numbers last year, it might have been less clear. This year now it is clear, and I think that has something to do with the fact that for the bigger banks that have focused on AI adoption for the last 5-6 years, we are starting to really see the impact on the bottom line now. And keep in mind that the banks that started back 5-6 years ago, and most banks that were looking at AI have been through an exploratory phase, which means looking at the capabilities and thinking about what we could do with them and testing a lot of things out in the banks. And now we're we're very solidly in a phase where the focus is on the return on investment and the bottom line, and many AI tools have been implemented and use cases have been executed now that are now really sort of part of the running of the bank, and therefore we're starting to see the outcome of that and the impact of that on the bottom line, as in efficiency gains, revenue uptake, and customer satisfaction, and i.e. sort of market, growing market share. So we see all of those factors take place with the banks that are most mature, for sure.
Thank you so much for that, Alexandra. Do you have a sense, how well prepared are banks for generative AI?
I think that's a very good question. I think that the banks that have had a mindset and focused on making AI very much central to the bank are ready for it. Their structures are in place. They've been doing AI and using AI for use cases for 5, 6, 7 years. Generative AI is a new tool. It has its certain characteristics. It's very different from machine learning and deep learning and so on. So it's just a different set of use cases that you're looking at. But if you've got your system set up and you've got ways in which to organize, as I said before, the surfacing of use cases, you just deploy that exact process using, looking at what specific areas that you can deploy generative AI. So those banks are ready. Then I think what is happening is that those banks that didn't have those systems set up and a way in which they organized working out where and how to use AI are really falling behind, because establishing that now at speed. I mean, these operational and structural decision-making processes changes and are take time to do. So if you don't have it in place and you need to make that change now, the banks that were in place are just pulling ahead really rapidly. They're able to deploy generative AI across many, many more use cases than banks that didn't have that organizational structure in place. So I would say that many were ready, and those who are ready are pulling ahead much, much faster than those that weren't. And I would be concerned about the ability to catch up those banks that were not mature enough to be able to handle the sort of sweep of generative AI. So what we might see going forward is a consolidation in the banking system, that those banks that are behind on their AI adoption strategy simply will go out of business.
I see. Alexandra, what does the AI talent pool look like in the financial world? How are financial companies responding?
Well, there's certainly a war on talent, that's for sure. By mapping the AI talent in banks like we do, we came up with a number that across the 25 biggest banks in North America and Europe, the talent pool of AI is roughly 46,000 people, which is actually really small. When you've got very big banks all competing for that talent, there certainly is a war on talent. You're asking, what does this talent pool look like? And I would say that from our observations, the background of the AI talent comes from strong data science, AI developer, model risk, machine learning capabilities, people who come from that kind of academic background. We also see a lot of talent coming from IT consultancies. There's a big flow between consultancies and banks. And then otherwise, we see AI talent really traveling around the banks like musical chairs. You will see a head of AI or senior person managing an important part of the AI talent capability of a bank moving to another bank. And so on, and sometimes back again. So we really track person by person and team by team.
I thought that movement within the industry was a fascinating insight. Alexandra, what's next for Evident?
Yes, we are growing the index. We're doubling the coverage from 25 banks to 50. We're releasing that index on November 15. We're actually hosting a big symposium in New York for those who are interested on AI for financial services, looking at what's on the horizon. what's going on in the regulatory space that might impact the banks, but then really getting into the engine room of the impact of generative AI, the questions of build versus buy, the questions around what does an AI first bank look like and how do you position yourself to become that AI first bank. And we're looking at actually a little bit of quantum because it's on the horizon. Quantum and AI capabilities are definitely something that the bigger banks are very conscious of and starting to hire in capabilities for. Quantum computing is on the horizon, not anytime soon. It's probably 4 or 5 years out. But quantum capabilities powered by AI is definitely very much there and already being implemented in some of the bigger banks. So we're going to be releasing the index, the updated second edition index on November 15. But prior to that, we will be releasing a leadership report, which means this is the third report in our deep dives in our pillars. We released a deep dive in the talent pillar in June. We looked at the innovation pillar in July. This month, we're going to be looking at leadership. And so looking at all of the ways in which this leadership gets manifested and the correlations to success, operational model, and looking at establishments of AI labs and centers of excellence, looking at how the executive team is structured, all to answer the question of how do you set yourself up to become the most nimble of banks in terms of moving from idea to execute to production as quickly as possible. And then we're going to be releasing a use case mapping report. So how are banks organizing around surfacing and putting down a use case inventory? What is a use case? What is an active use case? How do you measure return on investment? How do you think about time to production? How do you look at impact? What are all the KPIs that the banks are looking at? Where is AI being used typically? Where is the most sophisticated banks using AI? So that report will look at that. And then now, after the release of the updated index in November, we are going to be releasing our pulse, which means that we are going to be releasing the data that we cover off the index. A lot of our data is in real time. What comes from that is that we look at and monitor all of the activity, any announcements, job moves, partnerships, research papers, patents that get filed, any statements, any changes in top management. We're going to be looking at that and releasing a pulse report throughout the year 2024. Then we're going to be looking at the outcomes and the return on investment and looking at how we can map that so we can draw that line between inputs and outputs.
Fantastic. Well, I'm really looking forward to that. And Alexandra, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Ed. It's been such a pleasure to be here.
Excellent. We release new Innovators podcasts every week at FintechWire, so check back here for new episodes. We appreciate you listening.